Hello again, this is Mike. Here's the third game that I analyzed in the Wachusett Chess Club 2019 championship. It's a game in round three between Roger Cappallo playing white and Pulya playing black. The idea is to check a couple of spots with the engine to see what threats there may have been, uh, to see just how accurate my comments were, and the reviews that have been posted on the Billiards Cafe Chess Club Facebook page. So Roger started out with queen pawn opening. Starts off maybe looking like a Nimzo, but Roger played knight f3. Uh, this move and this symmetry, apparently, as you can see on the right for the opening explorer, is the anti-Nimzo Indian, which was news to me. So the game proceeded sort of normally. Both players relieved the tension with the center pawns, and eventually black got the IQP. With the next move, I kind of thought black may have been hoping for king pawn takes knight with opposing Isolanis, but I wouldn't imagine that that really appealed to Roger, considering that he can play queen takes and develop while keeping a little asymmetry in the position and saddling only black with the IQP. Yeah, so far nothing looks so crazy. I kind of like black's position. There's really no threat against black. Plenty of time to castle. White's e3 pawn sort of keeps the queen bishop out of play. Potentially white could play b4 and take some space away, take that square away from the c5 square from the black bishop, and then develop the bishop to b2. But instead, Roger started to do a little remaneuvering, and Ritvet castled, and then Roger played bd2, which I guess signals that he means to play to c3 without taking the time to play b4. It also means the knight has some other squares available to it. And then Ritvet played queen e7. I guess one idea there might be that maybe he can play bishop c5 with a tempo on the queen, and then if b4, I suppose he could tuck back to one of two squares, or even just come back to d6 with an eye on the h2 pawn. So Roger proceeded with that plan. Now this sets up a kind of a quiet threat with a mate on g7, but it just means that right now the knight on f6 is sort of held until some other defenses for that threat can be mustered. So they did come through with bishop c5, but sometimes a threat like this only serves to help your opponent. Now, when I said that, the idea was to misplace this queen. The problem is misplacing it in this game meant setting up another threat with potential mates on h7 as soon as the defender is removed. The other thing is that now that I look at it, this bishop is, as they say, biting on granite and really has not much scope on c5. So really this move only helped white. So just curious, let's see, let's back up to say here, what does the engine think about this? This is the point of the video, obviously. So this is Lee chess, and the heavier arrows are meant as the are configured for the top engine moves. So it looks like maybe knight g4, maybe then causing e3, and maybe come back toward e5, or maybe the bishop goes to e5. It's reasonable. Or a lot of times in queen pawn openings, you want to be able to get your rook on the center files to discourage the advancing e pawn. All right, and then queen e7, bishop c3, and then after this, yeah, see that right now it's basically a pawn advantage or so for white, and the engine likes queen f4 followed by one of, well, it's black's move, so the lowest positive white score is obviously desirable. That's hard to say. It's moving around. Obviously it's only almost done, going 21 ply deep. So you can see general purpose moves would be useful, and including knight to e4, where so that's no longer on the top of the top three. But it's curious that if white were to have played that, does it win a pawn? If black had played it, does it win a pawn for white? Maybe it does, but it's a king side center pawn. It's not so valuable, and there's plenty of open room for these rooks, as you can see. So, all right, that's interesting. All right, back to in the game, queen h4, stopping the mate threat on h7, centralizing a rook, taking an open file. There's just one fully open file, so that's probably a good move. Knight d7, queen g3. Okay, so obviously this, we see that white's got about a pawn advantage or so. It's a little early to be trading the queens from black's viewpoint, white's viewpoint. Black's minors are, nearby, but not especially helping in the defense of the king. And so queen g3 makes some sense, making yet another mate threat on g7. So how do we do now? A little better for white, still about a pawn. And it says that the idea for black would be to try to encourage a trade of queens. Now, if that were to happen, white could either maybe play a rook move and then on a queen capture centralize a pawn, or bring the knight to g3. But in that case, g6 would really limit the scope of that knight, so probably the h-pawn capture is better. All right, so back to the game. f5. Now that was one of the moves that popped up on the engine, but it was, second best here for black, and by a full pawn. So obviously f5, as in the game, is a problem in the sense that here's a new hole and here's a hole in black's position. This bishop has become a big pawn to protect the d5 and f5 pawns. And you might wonder if, well, maybe there's a way to hop the knight in and then take advantage of some of those weaknesses. And in fact, Roger jumped on knight f4. But in response, I think I like Ritvik's move to pin that knight. Now, if white were to try to, say, play knight to g6 to attack black's queen, well, black gets the jump on the exchanges. The only problem is white's capture comes with check. So instead, you might see maybe queen f7, or, oh, not f7, okay, not f6. And then the white queen has to get out of the way. But there's not a lot of space. And, going to the h3 square might encourage an f4 push, and then the pawn chain starts to get a little bit weaker. So Roger found a pretty interesting queen takes g7, and it's fairly comparable to the engine's choice of bishop takes, but you're going to see, I bet, these flop back and forth because queen takes was first a second ago. And then the idea here is a bunch of exchanges there, but now this exchange wins the exchange, and meanwhile black's bishop is on pre. And at this point, we're still up in the 3 and 4 pawn range, and which is basically this pawn that was on g7 and an exchange plus some positional weaknesses. So Ritwik makes a nice intermediate move here, knowing he's going to lose this bishop. He gets an extra pawn for it with check, and it's fine for Roger to just take it because he's already going to be up a full exchange, and it's worth apparently quite a bit, 4 pawns. So, I think that's partly the material, but partly a good full pawn's worth of positional benefit. And then making use of an earlier improving move, then Roger goes ahead and takes control of the c-file and invades with his rook. I think at this point we can probably stop at the engine. Much like in the game between Ray Paulson and Larry Gladding, the ending was very similar now, in the sense that it ended up being a rook against a bishop, but the bishop had a lot of loose pawns to defend, and it just can't do that against the rook. And so in the end, maybe it's like another 20 moves or something, the game ended in a white win. So that's it for this round, and I'll be back with another recap in the future. Thanks.